Hi, I'm Caliban. Stormgate is an up-and-coming RTS from Frostgiant, a new independent studio working on their very first game. Their goal is to create the next Blizzard-style real-time strategy game, which is a fair enough aim, as Blizzard seems to have little interest in progressing their StarCraft and Warcraft RTS titles any further. Like many others, I downloaded the playable beta during the week it was available on Steam and found the time to take a look. It's still in a very early state. There's no campaign, story or tutorial elements, and it still contains a lot of placeholder sounds and graphics, but I did manage to find the time to play a few skirmish games, so I thought I'd share my findings with you all. It's no secret that there is a lot of hype surrounding Stormgate. They've got a team of experienced developers as well as some support from a few well-known professional StarCraft players. The beta only contains 2 of the 3 intended playable races, the Vanguard and the Infernals, but these 2 do seem reasonably fleshed out with the majority of their units, buildings and tech trees. Before I go any further, I must stress that this is a really early beta and not a true representation of the final product, so this isn't going to be an in-depth review. However, a lot of the core elements are in place, so it should give us some sort of indication on what we might expect in a final product. I'm going to break this down into 4 separate areas: the engine itself, the map features, the factions and the aesthetics. So without any further preamble, let's take a look at the game engine. Let's get the most obvious thing out of the way. The game engine feels exactly what you would expect to find in an RTS inspired by Warcraft and StarCraft. I don't think this is a bad thing. The Warcraft and StarCraft series were excellent games, and if you're trying to continue in that vein, then I'm not surprised this is where Frostgiant ended up. This isn't particularly exciting or groundbreaking. I think it's best described as comfortable. I've had a lot of experiences with those games in the past. I'm used to this sort of look and feel, and I can figure out where everything is, and it generally does what I expect. It feels a little slower than StarCraft 2, which is probably a good thing. I always felt that with StarCraft 2 the entire course of a game could change within the blink of an eye, and if you lost focus on a certain part of the battle for less than a second, that could be it, could be game over. This did lead to some absolutely nail-biting tournament matches, but aside from the absolute top end of play, it did have a habit of making many games a little tiring and frustrating for the general user. I've not played Warcraft 3 in some time, but from memory, Stormgate feels a bit faster than that, so I think they've arrived at a good middle ground somewhere between both. What I did appreciate was the responsiveness. Every unit was quick to carry out the orders I gave it and appeared to turn, move and fire as I directed it without making me wait. I did have a problem with some of the attack move pathfinding when I was using a bunch of units in a small area. It didn't feel like it was by design, so I assume it's something that's just still in progress and we'll have to see how they tackle it in the future. One feature I did really like is the dual control method of building and unit construction. If I wanted to build a new supply depot, I can use the same method as I would in StarCraft 2 by clicking a worker, selecting the building, placing it and then shift moving the worker back to the mineral line. Alternatively, I can select a building from the main panel, place it, and then the most appropriate worker will leave its current collecting job, run over to the location, build the building and then automatically go back to the job it was doing beforehand. It's the same with the units. You can select a particular production building and then choose a unit for it to make, or you can click in the unit tab and place a production order and it will automatically pick the most appropriate building based on the current queue and then start making that unit. I think this is a good feature and one that will make it easier for you to manage your economy while keeping your main focus on your army. If you are a very experienced and accomplished RTS player, then this will probably make very little difference to you, but for all the new players and the rest of us average Joes, I think it's a nice addition. I also liked how the new units were automatically placed into a control group. I'm not sure how configurable this is as I didn't really use it myself, but I can definitely see how it would be a big help for newcomers. Finally, it seems that the global style special abilities are all handled at the top of the screen rather than as abilities on your command and tech buildings. You've got a nice big energy count at the top that constantly ticks up, and you just simply left click an ability up there when you want to use it. Just like the easy methods of building, producing and grouping, this makes the basics of the game a little easier to manage and I think they're a welcome addition. I didn't really want to talk about any specific units during this video, as so much is subject to change it seems rather pointless to praise and critique individual abilities or interactions at this stage. However, I feel like I really want to mention the sentry post because I really enjoyed how it worked. The sentry post is a defensive structure for the Vanguard faction. It's cheap and quick to build and doesn't really do anything on its own until you place an infantry unit inside it. Rather than being just a bunker for ranged infantry to shoot out of, the building itself changes its form and function based on the unit you place inside. If I place one of my melee units inside, it shoots spinning razor discs at the enemy that bounce between them and hit multiple targets, whereas if I put one of my ranged units inside it, it turns it into a more traditional gun turret. If I pop in a medic, it heals nearby infantry, and when I put in a construction worker, it has a little crane on the top and it repairs nearby buildings and mechanical units. Finally, I tried using my dog scout unit and I was really happy to see that it morphed into a radar building that gave me improved vision. I really enjoyed all of these interactions and found them really satisfying, and I liked how I could modify my base defences on the fly to better counter whatever sort of attack the enemy was sending to my side of the map. So let's talk about the maps. They feel very reminiscent of Warcraft 3. Rather than being a flat open field, they're instead a collection of rough lanes that eventually lead to your opponent's starting area and other base expansion areas. They are separated by large sections of impassable terrain represented as dense forests, but you generally feel that you've got enough room to move and fight and several avenues of approach. Some of the expansion areas contain both the primary and secondary resources, Lumerite and Therium, and some just contain the one. However, unlike StarCraft 2, you can build a dedicated Therium collection building, so that if you want to grab some extra tech resources, you don't need to spend the time and money on making a whole new command centre somewhere else. The map is littered with several neutral camps, not unlike Warcraft 3 or Dota. The first one I encountered was pretty basic. You killed the units there and you got a small resource boost. The other two were a bit more interesting. Once I defeated the creeps that were there, one provided a healing aura to the local area so I could top up my unit's health, and the other one provided vision to the surrounding area, not unlike StarCraft 2's observer towers. After a few minutes these benefits would stop and the mobs would respawn and then you could kill them again, but the camps did level up so the mobs were harder to kill each time, and I think the rewards they provided got greater too. This was another feature that I really liked, and I think it gave the players something to compete over in the early to mid stage of the game that didn't involve a direct assault on the opponent's base. I would love to see Frostgiant develop this feature a bit more, maybe ditching the boring direct resource boost camps and instead trying out some other time limited benefits, maybe increasing your global energy gain for your abilities, or perhaps something that's specific to your faction. There are two playable factions in the beta, the Vanguard and the Infernals. I'm told the final game has a third faction, but that wasn't included here, so we'll forget about that for the moment. The Vanguard appear to be Stormgate's version of the default faction. Generally, every RTS game has one faction with the most easily understandable rule set. They are not necessarily better or worse than any other faction, but they often have mechanics that have a lot more in common with the other games of the genre. These are your GDI, your humans, your Terrans, your Space Marines and the like. They play an important role and allow new players a more comfortable route into the game. In this regard, the Vanguard are perfectly suitable. They appear to be made up of humans and robots and thematically feel like a mixture of StarCraft's Terran Republic and Warcraft's Alliance. The Infernals are a little different, and I was expecting them to essentially be a copy of the Zerg based on a couple of videos I saw a while back with them having a mechanic that was a little creep-like. However, I must give Frostgiant credit for avoiding this trap, and they've created something a bit different instead. Thematically, the Infernals are a demon sort of race that visually remind me of the undead from Warcraft. The one Zerg-like mechanic they do have is an area of influence around their base, but rather than being a requirement for buildings and providing a vision and a speed boost, it instead provides a temporary health shield to your units that you move onto it. The shield itself builds up over time and gradually depletes once you leave this area, so it generally makes the Infernals quite powerful on the defensive. Unlike the Vanguard, which use a more traditional production model, i.e. you start production and then after a fixed amount of time the unit pops out, the Infernals instead use a sort of preloaded system. While idle, each unit producing building ticked up until it had a charge ready, and it could stack several of these charges at once. When I wanted a unit, I could click the build button which would consume a charge and then immediately the unit would be created. This let me stockpile resources a little until I knew what I needed rather than the usual spend everything rule I was more used to in StarCraft, which was a nice change and really separated the Infernals from the Vanguard. Without getting into the nitty gritty of individual units, there are other general mechanics that I liked when using the Infernals, such as how my troops would split into smaller demon things when they died, or I could force that interaction myself with some of their abilities. There were also some base defense structures that instead of shooting the enemy seemed to spawn these little angry demon things that would go and attack them instead. Overall, I found the design and execution of the Infernals to be different enough from the Vanguard to be interesting, and I think that they should be able to provide some enjoyable asymmetrical battles. The last thing I want to touch on is the aesthetics, but honestly there isn't really a great deal to say about them apart from that they're fine. They have that sort of modern, cartoony vibe that you would find in StarCraft, Warcraft, Dota or League of Legends, which isn't my favourite, but it's not too bad. Everything's quite identifiable and it does make the battlefield easy to understand. There's nothing particularly exciting or innovative here, but having played a few indie RTS games recently, I will say that it's of a higher standard than I'd normally expect outside of a major studio. And if you like this sort of art style, then you'll be very happy with the result. Overall, I've been pretty impressed with the Stormgate beta. It's obviously still very early in the game's development and they've got a long way to go, but nothing that I've seen so far has given me any real cause for concern, and there have been a few new features that I was quite excited to discover and enjoyed using in the few games that I played. I guess the big question is always going to be, is it any good? Well, I can't say that yet because it's not finished, but I think they're at least on the right track. I think one huge and important factor is going to be how the overall story, characters and campaigns are implemented. When you're just plonked down into a whole new universe, you've got little reason to care about anything. You're not really going to be invested in any particular faction or result outside of the raw mechanics of the game engine. And until we know who these factions really are, why they're at war, what's at stake, then I don't think a general audience is really going to care that much. I also think they need to learn a few lessons from Dota 2 and really put some time and thought into the game as a competitive entity if they want it to endure. If this is truly going to be the next best modern RTS, then it's going to need to provide easy access to replays, live games, Twitch streams, stats, tactics, builds and other features like coaching and practice. If Frostgiant takes this side of the game seriously, and if they successfully create an interesting and fun story campaign to properly set the scene and introduce us to their world, then I think they have a chance of making something pretty special. If they don't, then it will probably just get about 3 months worth of interest before being consigned to the bargain bin. Let's hope that doesn't happen, because I really like RTS games and I want a new one to play and I want it to be good. Hi there! Out of the 357,962 Stormgate review videos on YouTube at the moment, thanks for picking mine. If you want to tell me why you did that, leave a comment. If you like this video, then click the like button, and if you want more like this, then please subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and I hope to see you back soon.